Hello guys, well let's record now another series of videos with the reading of my other paper about language. Actually, this one is pretty important because this is the basis for everything that I've said in the other lists. Because in here we are going to study the foundations of language, which is the study of the speech acts. So this is the philosophy behind the conversation, implicatures, and the indirect speech acts. Although these are studies performed by different authors and in a certain way independent from one another, the theories of implicatures by Paul Grice and of indirect speech acts by John Searle are not only deep linked but in fact are mutually complementary. For we can see the crucial importance of the comprehension of both of them in order to obtain a better grasp of the notion of non-literality. This work will show the main properties of both theories and how they work together in an organic and a symbiotic way. The contemporary study of the language admits as indispensable the pragmatic dimension of the discourse for a more complete comprehension of the aspects and laws which govern the efficient and rational interaction of the ordinary conversation. However, it wasn't easy to introduce the notion that the uterans as use could really bring us a contribution for a precise understanding of these alleged laws. Mainly when that notion seemed to complicate more than explain. So, what am I saying here? At the beginning of the study of the language, we were much more interested in the literal meaning of the expressions because, according to our primary needs in nature, we would need to put simple names on the things, mainly the dangerous things, in order to identify whether that thing was dangerous or not. Or, do I have to stay away from it or not? That's a fruit. I need to eat that fruit. No? But with the development of the human mind, we have discovered that there is this pragmatic dimension in which we can understand a lot of new things, even using the same words, because we are using these words and expressions. And during this use, these words and expression might get a different meaning. It was in 1975 that Paul Grice presented a paper called Logic and Conversation, and yes, there is a logic behind the conversation. There is something that we can establish as rules, even when we are having an ordinary conversation, like at the bakery, in a square, because we are humans, we're logical beings. Of course, that we are expecting rules behind every action of ours. We can, of course, put aside some natural behaviors that we have, which are uh, more like the animals, right? But when we are talking about what makes us different from the normal animals, we would say that logic and conversation is the best thing that you can have to show them that we are different, which would seize once and for all the preconception that there was in thinking that the natural language was intrinsically not systematic, and that the everyday communication used to happen almost like an accident. For Grice couldn't be by chance the fact that the people could understand each other with a high degree of precision without a minimum mental organization in order to get that effect. So yes, we had rules even in these very ordinary conversations. The idealism of the logicians and mathematicians who defended that the language should be always given by a formal notation permitted a more precise and well delimited relation among the linguistics phenomena. But on the other hand, it simplified them a lot, making many of the details presented in the dialogues, even from the people who have never had contact with the linguistics, like irony or drop of a hint were left behind, and the objective of a satisfactory cataloging of these phenomena was itself boycotted by the means of its viabilization. That is, the language sciences. Grice intended to find a way to conciliate the formal and the natural, but without allow these losses to occur. This logic may be aided and guided by the simplified logic of the formal devices, but cannot be supplanted by it. Yes, we can actually describe the language with some rules, but we cannot actually say that these rules are in fact the natural language. It's a way to describe it in a normal or in a formal way, you know, in a way that machines could understand. But Grice wasn't agreeing with the fact that in the future the logic would substitute the natural language at all. In 1969, John Searle, a student under the guidance of the father of speech acts theory, John Langshaw Austin, brought a better sophistication of the theory with his book Speech Acts, and reformulated the taxonomy proposed by his professor. In 1979, with his expression and meaning, he related with this study several topics of the philosophy of language, which versed from the problems of reference, the descriptivism of Bertrand Russell, Peter Strawson, and Keith Donnellan, already mentioned in Searle 1969, page 157. To the problems of signification, literal and metaphorical meaning, mind, language, and society. About the sentence meaning, lexical, and the speaker meaning, who takes the liberty to alter as much as possible the literal meaning in order to achieve some linguistic interest. This initiative inspired him to think about the indirect speech act phenomenon, which defied the traditional notion that says that the comprehension of an utterance was only possible or at least optimized if the people stuck to the literal meanings of the expressions. So, just agreeing with the literal meaning of the expressions wasn't a good idea, because we could actually use the tools of the context of the nature and some other things of contextual value to say something else, and in some cases to avoid responsibility, for example. In practical terms, we see that the violation of the so said constitutive rules of the communication, meaning the basic laws which form and allow the transmission of the information from a person to another, is in fact planned by the participants of the conversation, although not based in an exactly conscious way, and we'll see how this works together with Grice's implicature theory. Let us analyze now the details of the implicature and speech acts theories and how the dependency between them takes place. So the aim of this paper is to demonstrate that although these are different theories, they are necessary to each other. It's impossible to understand one without the other. So, the implicature theory. Suppose a situation where the person 1 arrives at the bus stop and asks the other person 2, who is already there, do you know if the bus X has passed by here? The other then says, I'm waiting for it. The person who asked it then thanks for the answer and stays at the top waiting for the bus. At the stop waiting for the bus. The situation is so common that we don't realize the strangeness of what happened. We ask, how is it possible that we are satisfied with the answer offered above until the point that we thanked one as a consequence of that answer? So, in other words, how in this world this is an answer for this kind of question? The guy wanted to know whether the bus X has passed or not, and someone says, I'm waiting for it. No, the first one would expect a yes or no answer. So what in the hell is happening here? The question made demands, in theory, an answer of yes or no kind, but the answer given didn't only indirectly omit this content but has involved the speaker 2 himself, who represents no interests for one. Why then one has gotten satisfied with the initiation from 2? What has occurred was the following. Let us suppose that there were 2 men, for example. Although 2 didn't answer as he should to the first questions, instead of it meaning that one didn't understand him, one not just obtained the answer that he needed, but he also acquired other information, which could be useful to him in several ways. In fact, one supposes that 2 is a person mentally stable whose decisions are made in a rational way, and if 2 said that he was waiting for the bus to come, he has hidden the answer expected. No. When he said, I'm waiting for it. Well, if I'm waiting for it, so no. The bus hasn't passed, and since you consider that I am mentally stable, I'm giving you a rational answer, and you would probably trust me. Because if the bus has already passed by that way, he would not be there to talk to one. He would have boarded the vehicle. This opens space for the conversation to continue or to think that something else has been said there. Because one could also suppose that the bus X has already passed by in the presence of 2 at the stop, but maybe it could be full of people, or even could have ceased to work and 2 wasn't able to board it. Both could start to discuss about the governmental neglect concerning the public transportation due to the long waits until the arrival of the vehicles, about the quality of the journey, or even about the population rise. So we can note how much relevant information was hidden in the 2's decisions in giving the answer that he gave. Instead of a simple negative phrase, 2 had the intention to wait on one a tendency to a conversational cooperation. Considering that, for example, the inclusion of the personal problems in enunciation which strictly would exclude them, the content should be restricted to a yes or no, shows empathy and interest to help one, which goes beyond the mechanical and personal discourse and brings a more complete and efficient answer. Now we can see how much the one's thinking is more than justified. So 2, given that answer, has shown to 1 that he didn't just want to say yes or no, but he was kind of worried. He was kind of feeling the cooperation sensation that, yes, we should start to worry about public transportation, right? Yes, I'm still waiting for it. Can you believe that? So this is a no for the first question. But 2 has shown a lot of other informations. And he was starting to be interested in initiate another kind of topic with 1, because they were both suffering because the bus hasn't passed. Another important fact which we cannot avoid noting is that the 1's question was if 2 knew whether the bus X has passed or not. 2 could perfectly answer this. Yes, I know whether it has passed or not. This enunciation, by the way, is considered the exact answer which 2 could have given. However, if 1 had received this, not only he would not obtain the desired answer, but he probably would get angry with 2, who has shown complete indifference to the first problems and has not given a simple answer in an informative way. Can you see? If you have decided to give the exact answer, because actually, this is pretty logic. Yes, I know whether it has passed or not, but this isn't helpful for 1. The fact that you know or not is not helpful for the kind of answer that I was expecting. In fact, if I were 1, I wasn't just expecting yes or no. I was expecting all the contextual problems involved, because I want to know how many minutes I still have to wait for the bus to pass. So being so logical and exact would actually be worse than being conversational, I would say. You could also say yes, intending to convey that in some time of that day, the bus passed by there, which is not relevant to one's purposes, who wanted to estimate how much time it would take for the next bus of the route to pass in. For that, he would have to know when the most recent one passed. Thus, what would the logician say in this case if the code of the form, which should make the informational exchange more precise, would turn it totally useless in a way to make people fight each other? So, being so logic, in this case, would not be cooperative. So Grice calls this hidden information implicature, and it could be conventional or conversational. He decided to invent this name so we could not confuse this with the more common notion of implication, which content is obtained by logical and not contextual inferences. So the classical implication for Aristotle is something logical, not conversational or contextual. Of course, now we are trying to prove that logic and conversation are related, but we are also discussing the old terms that people use to apply. The main characteristics of an implicature is the fact that it is not a conventional information, although we will see that due to conventions, we can generate implicatures, which is conveyed intentionally by the speaker, although not necessarily the hearer is always able to understand it. So the implicature can be cancelled. Although the creator of the implicature has the intention to convey it, the hearer is not obligated to understand it. Precisely because of this hiding of the propositional content inside or behind the words and expressions, it is always possible to cancel the implicatures, although it is perfectly possible that these hidden senses turn to be conventional, as has been shown with the bus example above. In few words, what you wanted to say is different from what he said, but the biggest novelty is that the implicature does not restrict itself to just ambiguities, ironies, or metaphors. So these are subsets of implicatures. So that was a very interesting, innovative theory because we have a bigger set uh, to include all these terms here, ambiguities, ironies, and metaphors. We'll see also speech, indirect speech acts, and some other things. So I'm saying here that the buzz example was a conventional one because I was just counting with the presupposition that if I'm rational, if I'm still waiting for the bus, it's because it hasn't passed, or even more, a viable bus hasn't passed, because I could have had those problems, like the bus was full, or the bus has broken, and these informations were the information that were of interest of one. The implicatures of the conventional kind are those hidden information which depend on the conventions to be executed. More precisely, conventions which can delimit a standard meaning lexical for the words. So, in the bus example, for example, I was taking into consideration the presupposition that if I'm still waiting, it's because it hasn't passed. But I didn't say this literally, right? For example, and she is blonde, but she writes well. Although in logical terms, we are in front of a conjunction of properties. BX, X is blonde, and WX, X writes well. Concerning an individual X, grammatically, we have a double attribution made by a diversitative conjunction, but, and it should only be used when the first clause has, in some sense, an opposite idea if compared with the second clause. So, in logic, we would have just one kind of connective here, which is this one, but this one includes and but. But the use of but says something else. There is an offensive cultural presupposition which says that women with a blonde hair are normally intellectually unable, meaning that someone who actually believes in such absurdity supposes adverse the situation where we can find a blonde woman who writes well, which is an activity that demands a reasonable mental effort. Therefore, due to the conventional attributed to the meaning of but, it was possible for the speaker to hide this hateful preconception and convey it in an indirect form. It is important to note that, despite the existence of this presupposition, not all people share this information, and considering that, what the speaker said by implicature might be easily ignored and cancelled. So, in this conventional case, if I didn't have this culture, like for example, like the blonde girls from Europe, uh, who are, of course, most of them, I would say, since this is a first world country, well educated, they know how to write, and most of them there are blonde, so this wouldn't make any sense. Maybe this is a preconception for Brazilians, maybe, I don't know. So someone from that land wouldn't understand this implicature, no? Because it needs a presupposition, a convention. And the conventional meaning of but, which are supposed to use opposite ideas in different clauses, is saying that although she's blonde, she writes well. What a surprising fact. By the way, the case above illustrates a good reason for us to not depend completely on the classical logic to deal with the everyday conversation, because while this point of view sees that seated case as a simple conjunction of properties, a pragmatic perspective reveals many others adjacent information, which in fact were precisely what the speaker wanted to say at the end of the day. The literally spoken words reduced to a simple vehicle of the real information that the speaker desired to convey. So the words that I've said, the words that I've used, were merely a transportation of what I really wanted to say. The implicature of the conversational kind, on the other hand, are those which are of more interest to Grice, because they are independent of any previous conventional notion, formally established as grammatical terms, and still surprise us by being constantly utilized and comprehended with further problems. And so, how are we capable to understand each other without the sharing of a clear and efficient constitutive rule in thorough terms? Grice will argue that, in fact, such rules do exist, although they are not utilized in a strictly formal, exact, and explicit way. Either they are utilized in a rigorous sense, which could call by a clear conscious process, but in an intuitive way. In fact, it is precisely because of this shared pardon by everyone, or at least this would be the impression that we have, that Grice defends that in all rational information exchange, the participants of the conversation are observing a cooperative principle, a CP, which direct them when they start to perceive that the normative pardons are being violated. We always hope that a normal speaker would only violate the speaker only violates this good sense in a planned way. So if we are dealing with rational people, and we know that we must cooperate to prosper, to thrive, rationally speaking, it would be important that if I wanted to break this rule, my hearer would think that I've had a good reason for this and I'm trying to say something because I've done a rational thing, because he expects me to be rational. So it wasn't a planned way. That is, the participants of the conversation calculate that there must be a reason why the speaker has not used the conversational norm to enunciate what he has initiated, and that he is initiating something else, the implicature. This calculus would determine the probability to deduce which something else was that. Which something else was that? Because it is obvious that by being cancelable, the implicature cannot be fixed, but is relative to specific elements of the context. Despite that, there are some situations in which Grice argues that certain implicatures have a high degree of non-detachability and are maintained even in immutable and diverse contexts. For example, someone would only say of a married man that he went to see a woman using the purpose, the indefinite article. So he used this thing by purpose. He wanted to say something when he tried to be unclear which woman he was talking about. If the speaker was implying that this man will commit adultery, otherwise he would have said his wife. So hey, I don't want to be a gossiper here, but that guy went to see a woman. If he really wanted to say he went there to cheat on his wife, he could have said that. But he has hidden this information just because of the conventional meaning of the indefinite article. If I'm trying to be indefinite, it's because I don't want it to specify, and I want you to perceive this detail in order to see that I'm trying to say to you something else. Well, the classic example that Grice uses to express and to illustrate a conversational implicature was of the latter. Imagine that a professor who doesn't like a certain student has to make a commendation letter to some other professor, and he says something like this: "My student has a good writing, but we know that this thing is not a very good reason for the other professor to hire this student. Although this is a compliment, which is supposed to be an element of the commendation letter, this is not a relevant. It's not a relevant good thing to say about the student. Although this is good. So the other professor will understand. He didn't say anything relevant for me because he's saying that actually that student is not good. So Grice would say that this is a conversational implicature. But let's take a look. Now, what would be exactly the difference between conventional and conversational? In conventional, we would have to presuppose some meanings in ideas like in but, and of course, this thing here too. But Grice at the same time says that the fact that I was irrelevant, I was trying to hide a kind of information here, says that this is a conversational implicature too. But can you see that in the latter case, I was kind of making a presupposition too? I was making a presupposition that in a commendation letter, I must specify good compliments for the students, like relevant things that could help the other professor in his research, for example. So we are also dealing with a presupposition. So in all the cases, we have to deal with the presupposition, and in fact, that difference between conversational and conventional implicatures is not so clear. It's, it's kind of easy to understand it firsthand, but when you see that in both cases of but, the adversative conjunction, and the fact that we have a convention here too, indefinite article, and the fact that we have also the presupposition that in a commendation letter, I must have a presupposition that I must put something relevant there. All these things deals with presuppositions, and I don't see a real good difference between the conventional and the conversational. And people would say that the conventional appeals too much to the lexical things, like I've said here, the lexical differences in but or in the indefinite article and some other things. But in this one, I would say that there is also a presupposition too behind the meaning of the commendation letter, as much as we have in the grammatical terms of a conjunction, for example. So let's continue. So In any case, there is always an assumption that the hero does not make irrational decisions and that he does not act aimlessly and randomly. Participants always expect this from each other. According to Grice, to calculate the conversational implicature is to calculate what has to be supposed in order to preserve the supposition that the cooperative principle is being observed. And since there may be various possible specific explanations, a list of which may be open, the conversational implicatum in such cases will be the disjunction of such specific explanations. And if the list of these is open, the implicatum will have just the kind of indeterminacy that many actual implicata do in fact seem to possess. By disjunction, Grice means the fact that the correct interpretation of the speaker's purpose in making his utterance is included in a logical list of interpretation given by or A or B or C, in which the capital letters mean each one of the possible meanings that the hearer can assume until he calculates the correct answer, what the speaker hit and really meant. Because that's it, when you finally start to be kind of irrational, I will start to feel that you are weird, and I will start to calculate what are your intentions. Intentions and appears to be irrational. So maybe he's trying to say A, maybe he's trying to say B. It is of great relevance to note that by conversational norm, it is not meant here that everyone has read the grammar and perfectly mastered the canonical and modern way of communicating. The highlighted term means that no matter how informal or tribal the exchange of information is, it is essential that there be a minimum of regulative rules so that even the most primitive, that is, distant from what we commonly call civilization, to be polite, of linguistic interactions fulfills the constitutive role of being able to communicate something. The cooperative principle is a notion that helps a language with sufficient already established rules to maintain a good sense of regularity that allows a minimum information exchange. With the CP in mind, we ask, what does it consist of? Grice describes it as an abstract and intuitive guide that constantly tells us, make your conversational contribution such as required at the stage at which it occurs, by the accepted purpose or direction of the talk exchange in which you are engaged. So these are the rules that you must keep in mind. Try to be like this, he says. The CP is composed of four fundamental categories that give rise to maxims, suggestions of behaviors. They are categories of quantity, quality, relation, and mode. So the guy's trying to determine what are the things that are important to characterize a communicative interaction as rational. So you have to try to be like this. So in the next video, we are going to see the description of these four maxims here, and we will finally understand what are these implicatures. Bye bye, see you in the next video. Don't forget to like, share, and discuss with your friends all these new informations. Bye bye.